heaven and earth, where are they reconciled? Where do they meet in us? In a village nestled between two tall mountains. It was inhabited by a group of villagers, some the tradesmen, some artisans, some farmers, and for the most part they tried to get on as people do. But oftentimes there were disagreements and disputes amongst them. But as it happened, even though they were remote from other towns and cities and the capital, a magistrate would arrive from the capital with a large law book under his arm and reside over the villagers to give judgment on their disputes and disagreements, meting out his decisions as to how this would be done. Sometimes the villagers disagreed, thinking it was too harsh, his judgments, and other times they thought they were quite fair. But there came an occasion when the magistrate arrived with his large tome under his arm, but instead of sitting down to preside over the townspeople, he announced that the king had decided that their village was too small and did not deem to be worthy of his visits anymore. So the magistrate got up and left, leaving the people of the town flummoxed, not knowing what to do. So the mayor of that place gathered all the male elders of the town together, and coming together, sitting around a fire, taking out their pipes, they began to discuss the possibilities of what it was that they could do. But as the discussions went on and around, the old charlady would come in from time to stir the fire, and she would listen to those opinions that were being brought forth, and she would silently cluck her tongue to herself. And then after some while, she interrupted the meeting by asking, "Can I say something?" Well, the mayor looked around at all the men who were sitting around, and they all nodded in agreement. So the old woman said, "Don't you know that all knowing and all decisions are made in the heart, not the head? And so if we all gather together and reach a consensus of what our heart says, then there will be harmony." But then the old mayor spoke up and said, "Well, who will judge who is right and who is wrong?" And the old woman said, "Let me tell you a story." And so she drew up her chair around the fire, and she too took out a little pipe from her pocket and lit it up to join the men in their puffing. And she started. She said, "There was a village somewhat like our own, but nestled in a bay on the edge of a great ocean, where ships could come and find haven from time to time. And the villages, like our own, were very different in the tasks that they had. The townspeople, traders, the shopkeepers, the farmers, the travelers, and so forth. And they too tried their best to find agreement when there was disagreement amongst them. And they finally came to the decision that they would erect a large bell in the middle of the town. And when anyone had a disagreement or a dispute, they could come and ring the bell, and everyone would come together so that agreement could be reached as to how to settle this. And this worked very well. So much so that at first the bell used to ring very often, and people would come from everywhere to gather round. But then the bell began to ring less and less as the diverse inhabitants came closer together in harmony. But in that town, living on a hillside overlooking the village and the bay, there lived the richest of men. He was called Domazir. Now Domazir often heard the bell ringing, but he never joined the townspeople, maybe feeling that he was above it all. But Domazir had great wealth. He'd gathered around him the finest of the fine of artifacts and the like. But his prized possessions were his horses. Outside his house, there were stalls erected, and in each stall was the finest of the horse breeds. But there was one stall that was empty, because Domazir was waiting for the perfect horse. Now, as it happened, one day a three-masted vessel came into the bay and moored, flags flying. But after the mooring was made and the plank which joined the ships to the quay was set in place, out of the ship was led the most magnificent stallion, brindled in color, but with an ebony mane and tail glistening. Of course, after being confined in the bowels of the ship, the stallion was very feisty. So when the keepers tried to restrain him, they could not do so. And the great stallion broke away from its keeper and ran, galloping. But that great stallion took the path through the town and headed for the road that led up to Domazir's house. Now he was standing outside and could see all that was happening. So he could see this great beast bounding, galloping up the road. So he opened his doors, and when the stallion arrived and burst into his house, almost destroying everything, the tables, the chairs with its great hooves, Domazir's heart beat wildly. He had never seen such a magnificent creature. So taking his chance, he approached the snorting beast, rubbing its nozzle, until there was the opportunity to leap on its back. Immediately this great stallion took off down the road, and Domazir could feel the wind in his hairs and the great freedom as the stallion galloped free. Domazir had never been so elated in all his life. But after some time, of course, he had to return to his abode. But after arrival, he would not let his stable boys take care of this great animal. He took the brushes and combs and cared for it himself. Now from that time on, Domazir would often ride this magnificent creature, feeling the freedom, the wildness. But then, one evening, when they were riding back to the house, they were beset by a group of bandits and robbers carrying machetes, and they attacked the horse and Domazir. Now the great horse, flailing its hooves in every direction, quickly disposed of the bandits, and Domazir on his great horse were able to ride home. Now Domazir had named his great stallion Catch the Wind, because this was the feeling he had when he first rode him. But when they came back to the house, Domazir found that Catch the Wind had a great gaping wound on his side. Quickly he gathered the stable boys to come and dress the wound, flowing copiously with blood. It took some time for this wound to heal, but when Domazir came out and saw his magnificent stallion, now with a great gaping scar emblazoning its side, his heart was low. He no longer felt to ride this great animal. Each time he came out and saw the great scar on its side, he felt loath. But when he did, and they rode out, he could feel that Catch the Wind was not the animal that he had been. He tired easily, and so it came about that Domazir went less and less frequently to the stalls where Catch the Wind was kept, even though he was cared for. But then, one day, when the stable boys had taken Catch the Wind out to have some freedom to exercise a little, Catch the Wind felt that confinement, and Catch the Wind jumped the fence in which he had been enclosed and disappeared into the hills. Now, Domazir hardly noticed that the stallion was gone, and time passed, and Catch the Wind at first was able to find food and forage in the forest, but it was a particularly harsh winter, so Catch the Wind became a bag of bones, ragged, and finally had to make his way into town to try to look for food there. Now, as it happened, Catch the Wind came into the town square and began to paw with his hooves to try to get something that might be in the soil there. But as it happened, as his hooves pawed, it rang the bell that was hanging in the square. Suddenly, people heard the sound of the bell, and they came from everywhere to answer the call. When they gathered around, they said, "What is it? Who is it who is ringing the bell?" And then someone saw that it was a horse. And a young man came forth and said, "Why, that is Catch the Wind, the horse that belongs to Domazir. But look at him, a bag of bones, starving and ragged." The people gathered around, and they agreed that someone must be sent to call Domazir. And so 2 hefty men amongst the villagers were asked to go and fetch Domazir. And so they did. And when they arrived at his door, Domazir answered the door himself, looking askance at the men. And they said, "We've come to fetch you. You have been called by the bell." Without a question, Domazir followed the men down to the town square, and as they were gathered, the spokesman amongst them said, "This is your horse. Look at him. It is your task to take this stallion and care for him." Domazir, without a word of disagreement or dispute, said, "Yes, I will." And so he led Catch the Wind up the hill to place him in the stall that had been his place, his prime place, for so long. And Domazir had the task, and he took it seriously, to take care of Catch the Wind. He learned how to make the mash that would nurture the beautiful being back to health and life again. He brushed the tail and mane until it shone again. And now, each time he saw the great scar emblazoning Catch the Wind's haunch, he did not wince. He did not go back to the memory of that evening when they were beset by the robbers. But he did remember that this great creature had saved him. And so something happened every day, unfailingly. Domazir would go to the store and tend the great stallion until one day he felt that it was time, and he led Catch the Wind out and climbed on his back. And they went, the wind in his hair, the feeling of exhilaration. But everything had changed. And now, without any thought, Domazir knew, and he would take Catch the Wind back to his stall once again. The meeting of heaven and earth. What does this story evoke, elicit in us as recognition that in fact they have reconciled in us? They have met and merged. To a place where we know that our actions, our thoughts, our words, our gestures are coming unbidden, without dispute, without debate, without disagreement. What is this story evoking for us?